evening. We have a full agenda for you. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Roberts.
And make sure you're off mute.
Am I mute?
Yep, here, sorry.
No, Karen, you're fine.
Commissioner Roberts.
Here.
Commissioner Huntosh.
Here.
Commissioner Finneman.
Here.
Commissioner Lorge.
Here.
Commissioner Erickson.
Here.
And Mayor Bain.
Here. Just a reminder, this evening session, we are in a full meeting session. We've done a couple of workshops in this session, but this is going to be a full meeting. Because we are in a remote session, all of our votes this evening do have to be that roll call vote, so that will take a little bit of extra time. We've got visuals on the screen. I will do my best to kind of be watching for face cues of anybody wanting to speak to recognize, but if I am missing you, please jump in. Let's keep the conversation flowing as interactively as possible while we're in this remote format. And with that, I would invite all of you to shut off your video. If you go down into the bottom left tray of your Zoom window, you're able to stop your video if you would like to do so for the Pledge of Allegiance. Dan is going to put the flag up and we'll go through the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members of the EDA, we have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve.
I move we approve the agenda.
Move from Jenny, and do I see a second from Blake? Is that correct?
Second.
Blake, you're on mute.
Second.
Perfect. We have a motion from Jenny, a second from Blake. Karen, could we have a vote, please?
Give me 1 second here, sorry. Commissioner Roberts.
Aye.
Commissioner Huntosh.
Aye.
Commissioner Finneman.
Aye.
Commissioner Lorge.
Aye.
Commissioner Erickson.
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye. With that, our first item on the agenda of action this evening is to approve the minutes of the June 8th EDA workshop. Is there a motion to approve or any changes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from the EDA workshop.
Motion from Judy.
I would second
from Finn. Very good. Not hearing any further discussion. Karen, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Roberts.
Aye.
Commissioner Huntosh.
Aye.
Commissioner Finneman.
Aye.
Commissioner Lorge.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Commissioner Erickson.
Abstain? I think, okay.
Aye.
Commissioner Erickson. Mayor Bain.
Aye. Minutes approved. Our next agenda item this evening is the liquor and massage licenses, and we're discussing a program to provide COVID-19 relief and a grant program that we would like the EDA to entertain. Karen, do you want to walk us through this?
Sure. So commissioners, there's been some discussion about what can be done to provide some relief for those license holders that I think the talk has really been around those that have a liquor license. And so what can be done to provide some relief for them since they were not able to use their license for a certain amount of time. It's been calculated out and the total number of days is actually 84. There is in your packet, a governor's orders attached, which shows the initial date. So the first full day of shutdown was March 18th of 2020, and that continued with a couple of extensions until June 10th of 2020. And some of those restrictions have been lifted, as we know, but businesses, these particular businesses are not in full operation at this time. And so what is the other attachment is a spreadsheet that was created that shows certain licenses for business owners that have not been able to utilize their licenses during this portion of the shutdown. So it includes some liquor licenses, and then it also includes massage therapist location and massage therapist individual license. We have 2 separate massage licenses. I think there's 4 or 5 different liquor licenses. And so what we are looking at is relief payments that would be in the form of a business relief grant issued by the EDA. And so, you know, this aligns with some of the other efforts, relief efforts that the EDA is participating in with the business video series, the digital downtown website that is up now. And we are looking at reimbursement on this through the CARES Act, the Federal CARES Act. And right now the funds have not been distributed. So this information is just being provided for your discussion and any feedback on this. And then next steps on this would include, if we move forward with this, next steps on this would include a resolution of support from the EDA at the July 13th meeting, which comes after these CARES Act funds are distributed. We'll have more information on what can be reimbursed exactly with these funds. And so if there's questions, let me know for discussion.
So the the percentages seem consistent with the amount of time they were denied. So it seems like it's a reasonable story.
Yeah, so how it was calculated was based on the daily cost of their license. And it varies, obviously. A couple of the licenses are only $50 annually. Some of them are $3,200 annually. Those are for the full on-sale liquor licenses. And so the daily cost was calculated out and then was multiplied by the number of days that they were shut down, which was 84 again. So trying to give something, do a little something for these businesses to support them.
Yeah, I think it's at least something. So I applaud it. It's a great idea, and seems like a no-brainer to help these folks out.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And you're dependent on the state, did you say, allocating funds within this certain program? And that all depends on
it would be the Federal CARES Act. Yep, through the Federal CARES Act.
And then it depends on what they actually finally allocate.
Right. It depends on, what's reimbursable. So we'll know more.
Yeah, it's more important to know, A, when the state legislature is going to get around to approving the distribution of funds, which they haven't done yet. But B, also to make sure it's going to be a grant fund, so it is reimbursable with the CARES Act. Based on preliminary figures, the city is going to get close a little bit over $1.5 million for CARES and response to the coronavirus. So we really have to decide what's in there, how it can be spent, and what it can be spent on. So we're still waiting for not only the program to be approved by the legislature, but a little more guidance in order to structure this appropriately.
I guess I'll piggyback on that comment, a couple of points of clarity to make sure we're being clear on process, and also what the request is tonight for the EDA. The Federal CARES Act, funds have been made available. I think the question is on how the state's going to distribute that. And some of you may have been paying attention to the special session that was just wrapped up. And that unfortunately was wrapped up without a distribution to individual municipalities. So there is a question mark for the city of Forest Lake as to how much we ultimately will be distributed and when that might happen, to Administrator Casey's point on some uncertainty at the state level. I do think that there's, certainly as we're talking about some of these small programs, and this I put into the small program bucket, there's opportunity for us to fund this on our own. And I would advocate that the EDA fund, pursue this grant relief program for, liquor and massage licenses, whether or not we're reimbursed. I think if we're reimbursed, it's a nice to have, and we need to keep an eye on those dollars and certainly take advantage of them if they're available. But, the EDA does have money in its budget today to provide this, even if we're not reimbursed. It would just be, an out of budget expense from the EDA, it's certainly within budget. Our, 2020 budget did not contemplate a COVID relief grant, but to me, that's part of why we, provide those funds to the EDA, and I'd like to see support for this regardless of whether we're reimbursed or not. It's real value that's provided back to our community. I think it's solidly within the EDA's mission to provide that. And I guess I'd be looking for some feedback on willingness to pursue this, even if we are not reimbursed from the state. And when I say the state, it's the state via the Federal CARES Act funding.
Do we have any sense of the more information that was mentioned, or the timing of anything? Is there another legislative movement that has to take place so that we'll sort of see more then? I'm inclined to not keep those people out of pocket or support those people earlier than we might get this money. But I'm just curious if we have any sense of that schedule.
We have none.
That special session wrapped up rather abruptly on Saturday, and we're somewhat at the will of the governor's office and those legislative leaders on when that next special session may happen or when it may not happen. I think there's a lot of uncertainty there, which is to Member Finneman's point, part of my reluctance to tie this to a reimbursement, because I think we should do our part to just get the funds out there because we have it available today.
It seems highly likely that the legislature will pick this up and consider it a valued proposition to distribute. Doesn't that seem likely to everyone here, that they would be picking up the banner, at least getting some definition of distribution and a date?
Yeah, they have a lot of money to distribute from the federal government, so they have to sooner or later decide how to do that. So sooner or later, not knowing the timing, they will do something.
Okay. Well, I'm inclined to be helpful now if we can.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a separate?
Other thoughts around timing? Go ahead.
Is that a separate motion then? Is that different than what we're talking about? Is basically you're talking about first was just to recommend this to the council, but this would be something separate, right? That would come from the EDA.
Yeah, the next steps on this would be to prepare a resolution of support and present that then at the July 13th meeting, saying that the EDA is in support of issuing this grant, and then council is the approving body on that. So basically what the EDA would be saying is it would be a resolution of support. The total amount of this would be $9,085.44 is the full total that I have for the businesses mapped out.
Would there be other fee payers that would want to come forward that aren't within this context, within these groups, that would want to come forward and say, you've supported them, now support us? Is there more like that are fee oriented?
So that's part of the evaluation. If I understand your question, I think you're asking what else happens with those additional funds available to the city. That's one of the questions that staff has and that they'll be working through on understanding what funds are available and what are the available uses of those funds. And certainly once those funds are available and there's that clarity, there may be an opportunity for us to come back to the EDA and to, certainly have input on how we're using some of those. It's hard to, until that legislation's passed, it's hard to predict fully what that looks like. And so there's a number of moving pieces, but I think certainly there's an opportunity that we should all be tuned into, and certainly influential in our own session, in our own circles as much as we can to have those funds available.
How much have we got available in our budget for the EDA?
I don't have the exact figure right here as to what the fund balance currently is. Just to kind of do a process clarification, and I think when this was originally put on the agenda, some of the thought was that we'd know the amount. The legislature was in special session. We kind of figured at this point we'd have the allocation either on its way. We'd have a much better picture of what that looked like, and we sort of looked at, from a process perspective, to get a position, best case scenario for reimbursement was to do an EDA resolution of support and then have council do the grant issuance to make sure that down the road, if the, from a federal auditing perspective, that we have all of our ducks in a row. So that's what we try to intend. I think when the legislature adjourned without having that amount finalized, that sort of threw a little bit of a wrench in terms of process. However, I still think that, if we still shoot for the 13th, we can either track it forward. We'll have a better picture, again, hopefully, of what the CARES Act looks like. If we have to do resolution support on the 13th, we can go that direction, or we could come back with the resolution to issue it through the EDA funds with knowing what that budget amount is and what the impact is. So I think, if we can hold to the 13th, we can either have it through grant reimbursement through the CARES Act, or if that doesn't look like a legitimate pathway, we can get it prepared for EDA issuance on the 13th, if that's agreeable to the EDA.
President Bain.
Please.
If I might just add briefly, just a couple of quick updates. I was on a call this afternoon with the county administration, and they're hearing from the county associations that the governor also has the ability to make a direct allocation under the executive order for these federal funds. We might not need to wait until the next session if there is another session. So that's one bit of good news. The other bit of good news I want to just share is that DEED, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, has withheld $60 million of that CARES Act for itself. And starting tomorrow, they're going to be taking applications for these grants through the state system directly. So brand new announcement that just came out Friday last week. They'll start taking applications tomorrow. And if you check the DEED website, we can certainly direct, I can send that to Dan if you want to forward it to anybody. But there will be applications accepted for grant funds up to $10,000 beginning tomorrow through DEED. And I think they're going to keep that application process open until about 2 weeks. And then hopefully by then, we may have even heard that the governor is willing to release those funds to local communities. And I can tell you that Washington County is also having a workshop tomorrow to talk about these grant dollars. So we may be able to add some county received grant dollars to your allocation as well to fund more businesses countywide.
Thank you, Chris. Quick clarification, the $10,000 per application grant program that DEED is just opening up, are those grants intended for EDAs and municipalities, or are those direct grants to businesses that we should be, who's the intended grant recipient?
President Bain, thank you. That's a great question. It's intended for the businesses directly. However, the CARES funding that we've talked about earlier is actually intended for cities and counties. So,
great. And I know you're probably doing this already, but to the extent you haven't, can we loop in Nan from the chamber and her, she's got a great distribution list of the participants for those COVID calls. It'd be great to get that DEED grant program into those hands as soon as possible.
Will do.
I can imagine that it will be a competitive environment, so.
That sounded like there was a very short window, Chris, did it?
Yeah, and honestly, I believe the money will move fairly quickly. It's $60 million across the state. Half of it is targeted for greater Minnesota, half of it is targeted for the 7-county metro area. And there are some additional set-asides for minority-owned businesses, for women-owned businesses, and for veteran-owned businesses as well. So, but honestly, I do believe that the money will go really quickly. So hopefully, again, if businesses can get in the queue for the funds, it might buy us a little bit of time until we get the state additional funds to the cities and counties to create our own programs.
That's great. So we don't need official action from the EDA this evening. We're looking for feedback and support, certainly based on whichever avenue we think for, based on however the reimbursement funding, how that wraps up here in the next couple of weeks. there's certainly opportunity for this to come back to the EDA for official action. This was workshopped with council last week just to give them an update and provide their feedback. And so as we're thinking about this topic, is there anything else that we should have staff consider as they are kind of pulling together this kind of most concrete piece, and that most concrete piece being the license grants, knowing that we may have additional funding to consider some additional programming once those funds get released. Anything else we should consider? All
I've
right.
got a quick question, Mara. Does the EDA have any promised funding out there that we haven't spent? Have we committed to fund any projects that we have not done yet?
Dan, would you, it depends on what you call unpromised and unspent. I know there's some earmarked dollars for some projects coming up.
Right. So we aren't in danger. If we go ahead and fund the 9,000 now, and there's a delay on getting the funding from the state, it doesn't harm anything else we're obligated to spend coming up. Is that correct?
You know, I'd prefer to do a full budget analysis before I speak to that. I don't believe it would have any long-term impact on it, but I want to take a look at the numbers before I, fully committed to saying that. But I don't think we have any projects that are coming through the pipeline that this would prevent those from happening at this point. But let me confirm that, and we'll bring that back at the next meeting. We'll do a budget update at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
I continue to package the residual fund that EDA has with the budget that we have that we haven't consumed. And so it seems like between those two pockets, we're not in any jeopardy of damaging our resources at this point with this kind of expenditure. Am I wrong to think that? Am I wrong to reach back to the 150 or thereabouts? Is it not liquid? Is it tied up? Is there something I should be thinking about?
No, you're not wrong in assuming that. I mean, looking at the whole picture, I just want to make sure that if we plug in future projects based on work plan as well and get a complete picture. Again, initial off the cuff is looking at, from my recollections, it's okay, but would want to go back through and just double check all the numbers before I give the total thumbs up on it. So, but you're not wrong, Commissioner Finneman, on that.
Fair enough.
I would just remind council that we did have a couple of project dollars earmarked to support the downtown study and the downtown initiative. And so, yes, that has been delayed for our COVID delay. And so some of those funds may not occur in 2020 like we had expected. But I think that's the kind of the pocket of budgeted but unfulfilled dollars for 2020 that I think about. And I think Dan's on the right path here. Just doing a quick update to make sure that we're still tracking. But we did have dollars earmarked for those funds or projects. All right, great questions, good discussion, and appreciate the feedback. And certainly an evolving topic as these different sources of funds are changing, and as timing changes and the detail around how those funds can be spent become more clear, we'll have some additional information. But good to know we're committed to getting some relief dollars out there. Our next agenda item is to talk further about the BR&E work plan. Dan, you want to walk us through? We've got the BR&E work plan, and then we've got another kind of layer of discussion afterwards around the chamber and their impact. And so, Dan, you want to kind of tee up both of those?
Absolutely. President, members of the EDA, I think the plan for tonight was based on feedback during the June EDA meeting. There was discussion, there was support of moving forward with sort of I'll call it the BR&E program light, sort of a scaled back version from a full-on business retention and expansion program here in the city. One of the questions that did come up was, what does that look like? How do you scope that? How does the next steps? What does that work plan kind of start to look like? So what I kind of want to run through today is just sort of a high level review of what that work plan will look like for the rest of the summer months before we do a program launch. And then I do have a secondary topic here on the agenda, which is one of the first discussion points, which is the potential partner with the Chamber of Commerce. So I'll leave that as a separate agenda item because I do have that marked on the agenda as such. But just kind of want to go through, again, just kind of a high level walkthrough for the work plan. Main intent here is just to get everybody thinking about what is this program going to look like? What are some of the questions that you can be thinking of between now and our next meeting where we can really start to do some of that initial work and getting this program up and running. Going back, we set the start date or the launch date of September. So we basically have the rest of June, which is, looking at the calendar, there's not many days left in June, July, and August to really get this up and running. So what I did was I started with that September launch date and then started to work backwards and said, okay, if we're going to hit that September launch date, what are some of the high points that we have to hit on a monthly basis at our EDA meetings to make sure that we are able to launch this program in September. So in June, which is the meeting that we're in today, the first item would be to determine and outline the scope of work for the Chamber of Commerce BR&E services. I will go through that in detail here in just a moment, but that would be the first point that we'd have to at least start having that conversation about. And then if there's support moving forward with that, we'd work after this meeting tonight, staff would go back, work with the Chamber to begin drafting that agreement. So that's the kind of the takeaway that would land on staff to get that agreement drafted, to bring that back at a future meeting. Moving into July, now July is a meeting where I think a lot of this work will actually take place. There'll be a lot of good discussion and scoping that takes place in July. The first item would be an action item. Again, assuming that we can get the agreement with the Chamber of Commerce completed and both parties are in agreement to it, we'd review that agreement on the July 13th meeting and potentially take action on that item. We'd also take a look at starting to review the survey questions for the business survey. I have started pulling together some examples of what do some of the questions that you can ask during a scaled back retention program look like. If you recall the one in 2011, I think it was somewhere in the ballpark of like 70 questions plus, which I think is just too robust for what we're currently doing. So kind of going back through looking for some examples of what does that scaled back version look like. I will get those assembled into a document and get those released for everyone to review and then bring their feedback on for that July meeting. I think another key component that we'll look at in July is to start drafting the goals. What do we hope to accomplish during this program? What are the goals for the BR&E? Is it to simply establish connections back with the local business community? Do we want to start looking for adjusting our policy? What areas of policy do we want to look at? What sectors of the business do we want to focus on? Do we want to focus heavily on retail and restaurant businesses? Do we want to do manufacturing? To really start to kind of have a good discussion on where that is as part of the topic in July. So that July meeting is where a lot of this, more in-depth discussion will happen. If again, kind of making the assumption that we're able to get an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce and re-engage that partnership, the Chamber then would start to begin execution on that work plan in July. They would start working on that after the July meeting. Then we get into August, and here again, I think everything that we talked about in July will be brought up and rolled up into that first draft of the plan, and we can review that and really prepare that for execution in September, looking at the goals, the business visits, what data we're going to collect, the reporting, and then also finalize all of our survey questions. So we'd have that final draft of the survey questions in July. We'd also take a look at the review draft business visit list to make sure that it encompasses the businesses that we want to visit. There's any that, we want to add to that list. So we'll look at that, review that draft business list back in August. And then from there, start to work on establishing the business visit goals. By that, I mean the number of visits per month, the overall timeline. So taking a look at what we currently have for resources, how many members are able to go out and do business visits, how many per month versus how many businesses we want to take a look at. We should be able to get a pretty good timeline as to how long it'll take us to accomplish this initial survey of local businesses. So that's all done in August. Then in September, the final plan will get brought forward. The plan will be reviewed, gone over in September, and then we begin executing on that plan. Part of that execution will be to the actual assignment of business visits. So as EDA members, if you're willing to go out and do business visits, you'll be assigned the set of businesses that you will be going out to visit in the September meeting. And then I think ongoing, as we go through this process, one thing that will be added on to the EDA meetings is just a monthly BR&E status check-in. What I mean by that is not necessarily I went to these 3 businesses and here's what I got. It's more of a just making sure that we're on track to say that we got, if we had 10 business visits scheduled for 2 months or for 1 month, that we got all 10 completed or we got 7 completed, just to keep everybody up to speed as to what is happening with the BR&E program. And I think we also will review, as part of that review process, that check-in process, it's say you visit a business and you find out that they need help in a certain area. We can bring that back, have a discussion, and look at bringing those assistance programs, or if we are told of, hey, why don't we look at this type of programming option for the city, we can get those on future agendas. So we're sort of taking that information back from the business communities and are able to then get that slotted in for a future agenda. So it's not just a program that we launch in September, you kind of let it run in the background. This has actually become a pretty active item on the EDA's work plan on an ongoing basis. So at this point, I mean, that's sort of the draft of the work plan and next steps. Looking for feedback on if I missed anything, if you want to see something additional in there, or if any of the EDA members need additional information before we kind of go to that next level of steps. If you want more background information, let me know. I'm happy to assemble that. But right now, I'm happy to answer any questions on sort of the work plan, or if anybody's looking for some additional information.
Could I ask a naive question to better my education here? The chamber thrives on membership fees and city investment, does it not? There's a percentage of city money that goes to them. And this BR&E story is essentially additional services, an additional service contract.
You're correct. And I can actually, that dovetails into the next agenda item. So if I could actually hold your question just for a couple of minutes, I will address all of that in the next item there.
Okay.
Other feedback items for Dan, either on timing of next steps or kind of the content of some of the next steps as we see that work plan starting to come together?
I saw the letter went out to the businesses, so we are alerting them as to the time schedule. So it seems like we're trying to stage it so they can be aware of it and join in and be added to the story.
Right.
I say, Dan, looked like a really well laid out plan. I'm just wondering, is there any of your peers, other cities that are coming out of this COVID thing doing something similar that you're in conversation with?
There are. I was on a call with the University of Minnesota's BR&E Extension Service, which has a BR&E expert on there, and there are other cities that are starting to do that. I can reach out to them to find out exactly which ones are doing that and ask them for kind of what they're currently working on. That's where some of these questions, these sort of scaled back questions, came from. The U of M actually started saying, hey, here's a good starting point. So here's, I think it was 10 questions to start with. So yes, there are other cities that are doing this sort of like launching into more of the retention side of it. I don't have that list in front of me. It's sort of there's a lot of members that were on this call, but I can reach out to see, if there's any specific that are doing that, and then reach out to them to see, kind of best practices to make sure that we are, in line with what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about goals and different things like that. I mean, obviously we want to make it our own plan, but I'd love to see what some other cities that, maybe have a track record of success are doing that we could, piggyback off of, so not recreating the wheel entirely.
Absolutely.
Good feedback items. Anything else for Dan at this point? I know we're going to kind of continue this on as we talk about the chamber partnership in the next phase of this conversation, but anything else before we pivot to that? Dan, I think this looks good. We did a nice job capturing what we had talked about. Also, I like the kind of the timeline that's been outlined. Just calendar time, it looks good. It gets us a bit outside of the immediacy of COVID, which we had talked about. Also, just make sure that we kind of have an EDA that's engaged and ready to get started as well, and kind of the partnership with the chamber. So I think this looks good. Well, let's layer into the next chapter then and talk a little bit further about the chamber. And Nan sent her apologies that she isn't able to be here for tonight's conversation, but certainly still opportunity to give an EDA an update, and we'll have other opportunities to kind of loop her in future meetings. So Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, President, members of the EDA, kind of before I kind of dive into this, re-engaging these partner services that we have with the Chamber of Commerce, I just want to let everybody know that this has not been actively discussed at the Chamber of Commerce as far as I'm aware, and I've not actually had a chance to sit down and really go through these details with Nan at any level of, kind of digging through and like starting to really get items on the table. The reason why it's on the agenda tonight is just kind of giving that compressed time frame that we have. I didn't want to lose 3 weeks to make sure I went that way first. So basically tonight is just more of a feedback from the EDA, kind of more of a background as to how we previously partnered with the Chamber for BR&E services. And then if I missed anything in here, I'll bring that back and make sure I work with Nan and the Chamber to make sure that we incorporate the EDA's kind of what we want to have incorporated into that agreement. So to kind of start, this kind of on the backstory on this is back in 2011, when we completed our first BR&E project here in the city. One of the projects that came out of that was actually we partnered with the Chamber of Commerce to perform certain activities related to our BR&E program. I did include a copy of the 2012 agreement that we had with the Chamber in the packet. It starts on I believe it's page 13 for your review. And that just sort of kind of goes through in pretty good detail as to what we were actually, contracting with the Chamber for. That agreement was renewed annually through 2014. In 2014, it was not reviewed. And when I looked back, try to find a reason as to why it wasn't renewed, I couldn't find anything in the EDA's minutes or in our files that said it wasn't renewed due to a lack of performance or nobody was unhappy with it. Trying to recreate, history, what I kind of assumed happened. I guess this is my assumption, kind of looking back and knowing kind of the history as I do. As I believe back in 2014, the Chamber had a turnover. Colleen left and they were between directors at that point. The EDA was also heavily involved in the building of the city center here. So my assumption was the agreement just never made it to the agenda. So it was probably, in my estimation, more of just didn't get renewed and then sort of fell into that, wheelhouse of we'll get to it, and it just never got brought back forward. So just want to be clear, I couldn't find anything in the record that says the city wasn't happy with the way the Chamber performed or the Chamber wasn't happy with the city. I think it just kind of got missed in the, as the leadership changed at the Chamber of Commerce, and the EDA's focus was heavily involved in the city center at that point. But when you go back to that original agreement that we did have for the 3 years, basically what the Chamber of Commerce was doing for the city was spelled out in the agreement, and a few other things was develop and maintain a community profile for the city of Forest Lake. It also served as a point of contact for current and potential businesses and residents who are requesting information regarding the city of Forest Lake, including like demographic information, possible location possibilities. If a business is looking to relocate here, they could give them some site information, give them access to startup resources. A lot of that stuff the Chamber is still currently doing, but that agreement just sort of formalized that work item for the Chamber. This next item here is probably one of the more important factors for a BR&E program, was that the the city contracted with the chamber to maintain a comprehensive list of businesses in the service area. Ever since our agreement lapsed in 2014, the city does not actively maintain that business list. So we do have a list, but it's outdated at this point. But that again was something that the Chamber of Commerce did do for the city as a result of this agreement that we had. And then the agreement does state that the Chamber of Commerce did come to the EDA twice a year and provide an update on what they had done. So there was an accountability. They were given written reports twice a year stating, here's the number of businesses that we visited, here's a copy of our list, here's our, the expenses that we had. So there was a reporting component to that as well. The annual cost of the agreement when it was signed was $2,500. We paid that over 2 installments. So I believe it was a spring installment and a fall installment. So 2 installments, $2,500. So that's a little bit of background as to where we were with the Chamber of Commerce. And as we start to look at relaunching a BR&E program here, I think it's, advantageous for the city to start to re-engage that partnership with the Chamber of Commerce. One, to assist them with some funding, to give them additional revenue stream to the Chamber of Commerce. But I think overall, just sort of based on the current needs that we're going to have for a BR&E program, trying to find partnering agencies to sort of help with some of that work is going to be important. So looking at that, kind of looking at what we used to do with the Chamber of Commerce and kind of what our needs currently are for our new version, I started looking at, what would be kind of in that draft agreement. I think the first item I saw the need for was working to establish and maintain that comprehensive business list. I think there's a lot of value in getting that list up and running and keeping it current. I also think, again, serving as that point of contact for businesses coming into the area or residents who are looking for different types of information is, again, something the Chamber is already doing, but this sort of more formalizes them as a partner for people coming into the area. I mean, a lot of businesses will naturally reach out to the Chamber of Commerce sometimes before they call the city because they're more engaged with the business community. But this sort of formalizes that, yes, they have a role with the city. They're a partnering agency for business contacts. One thing I did see, that in addition to some of that initial language that was in there was to have the EDA be active in assisting, or excuse me, the Chamber of Commerce be active in actually helping the EDA conduct some of the business surveys. Nan has done a phenomenal job of establishing contacts and relationships with the restaurant and retail community here in the city. And I think by contracting with the Chamber of Commerce to kind of start on some of that survey work, she already has that in with those business owners. So I think it'd be easier to get some of those surveys completed. Survey work just in kind of a general times can be tough with businesses are busy anyway, but trying to do that on top of managing a COVID response, it can make survey work, especially if you're kind of cold calling on a business survey, it can be a little bit more challenging. Nan does have a lot of those relationships, well established. I think we're able to kind of, build on those relationships to get some of that data and that survey completed relatively quickly. Just in some of the reporting, I don't necessarily think that we would need a twice a year written report in terms of what the activities are. I had that changed to just an annual report. So once a year, just get a written report of what the activities were. But for the kind of check-ins, would just be doing a verbal update during the EDA, much like she's already on the agenda. The Chamber is already on the agenda. They would just give an update as to, did a business call or contact in, looking for a site, just a kind of an update as to what the activities are. I think if you look at sort of the total scope that's outlined here and kind of based on, the current market conditions, I kind of put that the agreement amounted about $5,000 to start with for 2020. I think adding that additional work of the surveying justifies the additional expense on there. So that's sort of the starting point. With that, I mean, it's kind of taking that original agreement that we had, building on some of the needs for, our current BR&E program, and then also doing that market adjustment for costs. So that's kind of the starting point. What I'd be looking for here is kind of feedback on this And then based on that feedback, I'd start having the conversations with NANT and the chamber to see, obviously, if they have the capability or the capacity at this point to kind of take on these additional roles and to kind of really kind of start that conversation point. All of that would then get wrapped up and then brought back at a future meeting for the actual signing of the agreement.
Thank you, Dan. I want to make sure I'm tracking and clear. So the previous program we had with the chamber was $2,500, and you're proposing that we move that to $5,000. Is that right, per year?
Correct. Yeah, and part of that main reason is the additional survey work. I mean, that's you know, and also we have an agreement that's 10 years old at this point. So I think there's also a market adjustment in there. So I think we're still in line with what we see. But yeah, it was originally 25 and proposed as 5.
Yeah, no need to justify the amount. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yep.
Dan, I'm curious on that first point, establish and maintain a comprehensive list of businesses in the service area. So, I mean, we're assuming that we're asking the chamber to maintain that list, and that's in addition to chamber members, right? I mean, that's everybody, whether they're paying dues to the chamber or not.
Correct.
And then how do we at the EDA, if we want to access that, how do we access that? Is that something we'll get a copy of, or?
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be compiled into a spreadsheet. You know, that's kind of the vision. I would have be a spreadsheet of businesses that we'd maintain here at the city, and then if, you know, EDA, that'd be the base document that then we use for business visits. We take a look at, here's our goals for business visits. I mean, I think what you're going to see is going to be a lot of businesses on it that we may not get to everybody in the first year of the program, you know, but maintaining that list, there's a lot of other things that we could do with the list. And I'm not saying that we'd solicit them for advertising like that, but just kind of having that list of current businesses here gives the city that sort of baseline information of what currently is happening, you know, economically within the city. What is our economic base? And since we don't,
I think just having that comprehensive list is pretty darn valuable in and of itself. So having them do the legwork on that is a pretty huge ask. My other question on that bullet point though is, what is the service area? Because I know her scope of service area is probably broader than the Forest Lake city limits. So how do we define that service area?
My initial thought would be the head of service area be the city of Forest Lake. That language was in the original agreement. You know, I'd have to go back and try to figure out what drove that language to be the service area, not the city. And it may have been where they wanted it more regionally based at the time. But since the EDA, the Forest Lake EDA is paying for, I want that kind of scoped out to be within the city of Forest Lake and not necessarily outside of that. Now, if NAN wants to go out, I mean, obviously their service area and our service area overlaps, but they're not exactly the same. So, I mean, if they want to expand out, you know, by all means, but our main focus would be within the city limits. Okay.
Can I expand on that, Dan? If there was an opportunity to partner, for example, I know City of Wyoming has an EDA. If they were to partner with the Wyoming EDA or partner with Columbus, for example, would we be open to that type of a shared work plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously economies of scale that take place if you're bringing other cities on board, you know, and again, it's sort of, you know, the chamber's boundaries sort of cross multi-jurisdictions, right? And you want to make sure that funds at Forest Lake kind of stay within Forest Lake. However, if we're able to partner in and get, you know, economies of scale, yeah, we can definitely take a look at if there is a benefit to, you know, expanding that service area out.
But am I correct that would be more for the chamber to explore? Like it's more kind of up to them if that was an avenue they wanted to explore.
Correct.
Okay.
Curious about bullet number 2 as well, as far as working with current and potential businesses and residents requesting information. Maybe this is a better question for Nan, but anybody here have a working knowledge of what that, if somebody makes a request, what that looks like? And the reason that caught my attention is because I literally reached out to a Chamber of Commerce of a city I was planning to move to during my senior year of college. And I just got all kinds of great information from local businesses. Like that chamber executive director shared my inquiry with relevant businesses. And I was getting moving companies, I was getting apartment, I mean, like all these different things that were relevant. So do we have any sense of what that looks like, if that's part of our scope of services that we're asking for?
That is a very good question. I know that we did have, as part of, when we looked at this agreement back in the, in 2011, was that part of that was there was a brochure that was developed as kind of a starting point that kind of showed, some of the what is enforced. Like, I don't think it got to the level of what are all the different businesses here, but there was definitely a start to get information out to people when they called in, but I think that's a great point in terms of what does that look like. I mean, that'd be something I could talk with the chamber to see what they currently have. Well, how can the city supplement that? Because we have some of our own information here, but our information is more, not so much business, and that doesn't list out individual businesses. It's more just sort of environment wise, but maybe there's a way we put both two together and get a decent, package to start with.
Yeah, I mean, information on the schools, the park and rec, I mean, the lake. I mean, there's so much for people that are thinking about moving here.
The chamber does have a very detailed list that she refers people to on the website. And our website does link to the city and the parks and recreation and those other facilities. She gets a lot of phone calls, and she's been updating our website at the chamber, our being chamber, and recategorizing to help people navigate it better. So she does a great job, and she does get a lot of phone calls from people coming into the area.
I know we're having this conversation a little in advance of the chamber being able to dive into some of the more meat from their perspective. And so I would suspect that this will have certainly some evolution from the plan that's on the page today to what we may ultimately agree on. But that said, I'm interested in other thoughts or other direction we might want staff to take into those conversations with the chamber.
I think upping it to 5,000 is very reasonable because the chamber does need an additional, we lost our part-time person. And with what Nan's doing with updating in the CRM and now taking this on, there's a lot of man hours just in data entry and data collection. And that will really help the 5,000 a year, that increase.
Will there be a half-time person coming back on, or is that a loss totally?
Right now, the chamber cannot bring on somebody to replace them due to the lack of membership dollars coming in because of COVID, the repercussions. Okay. So we are maintaining our budget and hoping to get back to normal in the fall when people catch up with their membership dollars.
I would add too that maybe we want to look at something more for a budget for next year on top of that 5,000. If we're putting a lot of that 5,000 towards this new project, it's not giving them any more, like Dan, you mentioned, just the increase just that was naturally put into that. So 2,500 back whatever years ago, that money does not go nearly as far.
Mm-hmm. Whatever we do for helping the chamber fund is going to pay off for the EDA, because that's what the chamber is all about, is finding businesses, making businesses happy, retaining businesses. And that's what the EDA is all about too. We really need to partner with them very strongly. And I think it's a great idea, Blake.
Agree. I also, as that work plan is being built out, and some of the details on that work plan, whatever we can be doing to kind of utilize, the resources of LATV and some of the other things that we've brought to the table, continue to be creative in how we're pulling resources together. So certainly. All right, anything further on this agenda item this evening? Or Dan, any other feedback you need from us before conversations with the chamber?
Nope, I think I have what I need. I will reach out to the chamber and have the conversation and hopefully bring back an agreement in July.
That's great. Thank you. Our next item this evening is the chamber update, and I know Nan isn't able to be here tonight, but Jenny, did you have anything you wanted to share from a chamber perspective?
Sure. Nan and our ambassadors have done several ribbon cuttings of reopenings, which has been real successful, just kind of giving everybody a boost and some more awareness. And then the ribbon cuttings for 2 new businesses, Fireside Getaway and Coffee Smith. So we're very excited to have 2 new businesses.
Yeah, it's been exciting to see. And Chamber's doing a great job on just creating the enthusiasm and the awareness, and it's good to see positive news and some expansion as well.
Mm-hmm.
Any chamber questions for Jenny? All right, we'll transition to Chris Eng for Washington County. Chris, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, President Bain and members. And just again, briefly, the county board is going to be holding a workshop tomorrow at the finance committee, actually, to talk about the CARES funding. If the previously agreed to amount of CARES funding did come to Washington County, it's looking like a pretty significant amount. It's about $31 million. And the county is going to consider putting between 8 and 9 million of that into business grants countywide, on top of what the cities receive directly. But again, contingent upon what the governor does or the legislature does, but we do anticipate that we will be able to help businesses with reopening. And we're finding that the cost to reopening is very expensive. And so we want to make sure that we can move those dollars quickly, get them in the hands of the businesses. And so we're starting to work on the policies and the procedures. We're looking at grants of up to $10,000. And of course, this would all require county board approval, but the program would be administered through the Open to Business program. So Tyler Hilsebeck would be the one that is actually overseeing the grants. And Tyler's right now talking to business on a daily basis and has a really good idea of how to move those dollars quickly. And along with the lenders in the county, we'd want them to be aware of the resources in the chamber. I did send President Bain, I sent you and Dan and Patrick a copy of the deed press release that is available starting tomorrow. So hoping to get the word out that those dollars are available. And that $60 million will go quickly. So if you do know businesses that would be of interest or potentially a candidate for applying for those grants, let's get them in the queue as quickly as possible. And with that, I will pause and stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, any questions? I guess, Dan, could you forward that email that Chris sent to us to the full EDA so they're able to have those resources as well?
Yep, will do.
Thank you. Any questions for Chris? All right, that is our last agenda item this evening. Just a quick point of note before we adjourn, a reminder, emails went out on the kind of restarting the downtown initiative. And so those emails have gone out, and we are tentatively looking at, assuming we're able to move forward from a COVID perspective, the end of July. So please, I know a lot of you have done a lot of work in reaching out to your network and getting folks engaged in that. Please restart those activities, and certainly let Dan or I know if there's anything that you need to support those. We're looking forward to keeping that project moving. And before I entertain a motion to adjourn, anything else this evening? I'm not seeing anything. Thanks for the.
Is that meeting tentatively scheduled for July 27th?
Dan, I believe you're nodding. Is that right?
Yeah, it is tentatively scheduled for the July 27th, which would be the normally scheduled EDA meeting for July, the second EDA meeting in July.
And we have calendared those to follow that second EDA meeting of the month, which is that fourth Monday of the month, during that EDA slot of 5:30 in the evening.
Can I ask something unrelated a little bit back
yes,
to
please.
mention of the Coffee Smith. I think it's great that there's a new business there. What is, and I know without Donovan on the call here, maybe I don't know if the rest of the staff knows, what is the long-term plan there? Are they going to move into that facility? Is there handicap parking accessible right now, or any handicap accessibility to that current situation? And then the other lead-on question would be is, it seems as though obviously more food trucks, are we allowing them to be at a certain location longer than normal? Because it seems as though at one point they could be at a certain time or a certain place for X amount of time, and then they had to move, and then they could go back to that. Just by driving by, it seems like some of these trucks are staying longer than normal.
Yeah, I don't have an immediate answer for either of those. So let me ask Donovan about the coffee and the food trucks, and we'll get back to you on that.
Anything else this evening? Not seeing anything. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would move to adjourn.
I'll second.
We have we'll take a motion from Finneman and a second from Blake. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Roberts?
Aye.
Commissioner Huntash?
Aye.
Commissioner Finneman?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorge?
Aye.
Commissioner Erickson?
Aye.
And President Bain?
Aye. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned. Have a good evening.
All right. Thank you.